Hey there, faithful listeners. It's Jen here with P40ministries.com. We are in Genesis chapter 13 today, and I'm in a very good mood right now because my power finally came on. I was in a really terrible mood earlier because I was trying to record this episode and my power just decided to completely cut out, and I was left sitting there without recording and not having any power. And I was extremely irritated, but now my power's back on and I'm very happy once again. It's amazing. I can't even survive like 10 minutes without power. It's kind of bad. But we are in Genesis chapter 13, verses 1 through 18, and I'm actually going to be reading the entire chapter today, but it's not super long, so I think we can get through it. And a lot of it tends to be kind of self-explanatory. This is just talking about Abram and a little bit about Lot, his nephew. So let's start reading verses 1 through 18. I will be reading out of the WEB version like I usually do, but you can read out of whatever version you prefer. And also make sure you grab your cup of coffee and join me as I read. Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. He went on his journeys from the south as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. There Abram called on Yahweh's name. Lot also, who was with Abram, had flocks, herds, and tents. The land was not able to bear them, that they might live together, for their possessions were so great that they couldn't live together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites lived in the land at that time. Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are relatives. Isn't the whole land before you? Please separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left." So Lot lifted up his eyes, and he saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Yahweh, like the land of Egypt as you go to Zoar. So Lot chose the plain of Jordan for himself. And Lot traveled east, and they separated themselves from one another. And Abram lived in the land of Canaan, and Lot lived in the cities of the plain and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinners against Yahweh. Yahweh said to Abram after Lot was separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward, eastward and westward. For I will give all the land which you see to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth. So if a man can count the dust of the earth, then your offspring may also be counted. Arise and walk through the land in its length and in its width, for I will give it to you." And Abram moved his tent and came and lived by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and he built an altar there to Yahweh. So this is right after Abram made his big mistake with Sarai, his wife, in Egypt. And if you didn't hear that podcast episode, definitely go back and listen to that one just to give a little bit more context as to what is happening in this episode. And that episode was done on Wednesday, so make sure to go back and listen to it. But what happened was Abram told the Egyptians that Sarai, his wife, was actually his sister. And Pharaoh ended up taking Sarai as his own wife. And when Pharaoh was plagued by God because of this unrighteous act, he figured out that Sarai was actually Abram's wife, and he banished Abram because of what Abram had done. Abram had acted out of fear and was banished because of what he did with Sarai, his wife. So it says here in verse 1 of chapter 13 that Abram went up and out of Egypt. So that means he left Egypt. He went up back to where he was. He and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, and then they headed south, it says. So Abram was very rich in livestock because, first off, he was probably rich beforehand, and secondly, it says in Genesis chapter 12 that Pharaoh had treated Abram well because of Sarai's sake. So before he knew that Sarai was Abram's wife and he thought that Sarai was Abram's sister, he treated Abram super well, and he gave him all these servants and camels and gold and silver, and Abram profited off of his wife. So he ends up exactly where he left off, because he was banished from Egypt, and he ends up exactly where he was, between Bethel and Ai, at the place where he built that altar at the first, in Genesis chapter 11. And it's kind of funny because you hear that in Genesis chapter 12, there's this crazy famine happening in the land, right? And Abram had originally left that place because of that famine, and he went into Egypt to help support his servants and his family and his livestock so that they wouldn't starve from this famine that was happening. And that's why he went into Egypt. But when he was banished, he's back in the exact same spot that he was before. And if you look here, it says that Lot also had riches and also had a lot of livestock. And the land, there was not enough grass to support all these herds of both Lot's and Abram's. So the herdsmen between Lot and Abram were fighting with each other and saying, like, no, that's my spot of land for my herds. And Lot's would be like, no, that's my spot. And they were fighting because there was not enough food to go around, because this famine was still happening. So then Abram ends up saying to Lot, his nephew, by the way, he says, Lot, look, we are relatives. Let's not fight over this. You can go wherever you want. And where you go, I will go the opposite direction, is what he says. He says, choose first. You can go wherever you want to go, and then I will go on the opposite direction. So Lot, he looks up and he sees all this beautifully watered plains near the Jordan River. And he decides to go that way. And he ends up pitching his tent and living on the outskirts of Sodom. And it says in verse 13 that Sodom was exceedingly wicked, and they were sinners against Yahweh. But Lot chose to live there. And after Lot separates from Abram, Yahweh, or God, comes to Abram and he says to him, everything that you see, I am going to give you. And it kind of reminds me of that scene from The Lion King, when the lion is telling the little lion that everything the light touches is yours. And that's kind of what God is saying here to Abram. He's saying, look at the entire land. This is what I'm going to give you and your relatives and all of your descendants. And he goes on to say, I will make your descendants as great as all the dust of the earth. In verse 16, he says that. And he says, so if a man can count all the dust of the earth, which is impossible, and I'm talking like the little grains of dust. I think there's other versions of the Bible that says all the grains of sand. I will make your offspring like all the individual grains of sand. That is how many people are going to come from you, Abram. And he says, not only am I going to give you this land, but you are going to be the father of a great nation. And he says, go on, look around, look at all this land I'm going to give you. And that's in verse 17. He says, through all this land, go and look around and pitch your tent wherever you want, because someday this land is going to be yours. So Abram does that, and he ends up moving his tent, and he decides to live by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and he built an altar there to the Lord. So he ends up worshiping the Lord and potentially worshiping him out of Thanksgiving. So that was Genesis chapter 13. Join me again on Monday. Don't forget, we don't have a podcast episode on Saturday mornings, but my blog does update every single Saturday morning, and make sure you take a look at that blog post. I have not gotten it written yet. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. But it will be written. And make sure you go to my website, www.p40ministries.com, to take a look at that. Make sure you subscribe to the emails so that you never miss a podcast episode. Make sure you never miss a podcast episode, and also a blog post on Saturday mornings. So definitely subscribe. And that will always keep you in the loop with P40 Ministries. And I'm going to ask that everybody have a fabulous rest of your day. And as usual, God bless and happy listening, faithful followers.